one of the things that I guess even to an extent surprised me doing the research, because a lot of people associate Men in Black reports with the 1950s and 1960s. But the more I began to delve into the subject and getting witness reports, I often find that, when you write a book, people contact you with their own cases and experiences. And I found that the number of reports of Men in Black type accounts today and in the last 10 or 20 years really is no less than at its height in the 50s and 60s. What I found was the big difference was that because of the publicity given to the Hollywood movies, people were less willing to talk about encounters with the Men in Black. It's kind of like a Hollywood film comes out, and then 2-3 years down the line, you get visited by the Men in Black. Nobody's really going to believe you've been visited by these MIB characters. They're going to say you've overdosed on watching too many Hollywood films. And so what I found is that the experiences are no less today, but certainly the willingness for people to come forward and risk ridicule has led to a decrease in the reports being filed, unless the person realizes, they're going to be treated seriously and fairly. So whoever these sort of weird black-suited characters are, they've been ever present on the UFO scene for decades. And I mean, I cite in the book highly credible people who'd had UFO experiences, the 70s, 80s, 90s, as late as 2008, and had run-ins with these Men in Black, and really did have a feeling of menace, coming from them. As one of them told me, that the look that the person or entity had on its face was almost like that of a dog when it's about to bite. You didn't even want to get close to them. That was sort of the atmosphere that they seem to exude when you're in their company.
But with so many witness reports all over the world in every country about UFOs, you would think that there would be less reluctance because there's more immersion, there's more reporting, and with the internet, more discussion, more of preparation and absorption that the UFOs exist. So you would think that the Men in Black phenomenon would be dropping.
Well, yeah, you would. I mean, that's actually a very good point. I think, again, I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that, people are willing nowadays, because there is sort of more media sympathy with the subject, they are more willing to talk about UFO experiences and sightings. But I think, there's sort of a big leap between saying, hey, I saw this strange object hovering over the house last Saturday night at midnight, and saying 3 guys in black suits and pale skin banged on the front door and warned me never to talk about UFOs. It's sort of a far more controversial aspect of the UFO subject. And I think, even for me, it's like, would I report a UFO sighting? I probably would. If after writing the book, if I got a visit from the Men in Black, would I talk about that? Probably not, because people might say, he's just trying to promote his book. I probably would, ironically, stay silent, because it would be too unbelievable. And I think that is one of the key issues with the Men in Black reports. Although the witnesses are highly credible, the stories do come across as incredible, and I think, or unbelievable. That's not as any detriment to the witnesses, but they do. And I think the witnesses recognize this as well, and that sort of often prompts them not to say too much, or to be a bit wary at times.
So it's part of the landscape of the event that communication about it is a credibility killer right off the bat.
Yeah, I think actually, and this is why it gets even more complicated, is that there are people in government who realize that there's a genuine, very weird aspect to the Men in Black mystery, which they know is nothing to do with them. They know it's nothing to do with the government. But I think they actually exploit that weird mystery, and may even dress deliberately like these weirder Men in Black as a means to cover their own tracks in case anybody says, I got visited by the FBI and I want to put in an official complaint. Well, if you specifically ensure you dress like the Men in Black and you don't show ID cards, etc., you're actually covering all bases, so to speak. And what's interesting on this aspect is that I cite in the book a document that surfaced through the Freedom of Information Act from the U.S. Air Force, where they actually circulated a memorandum throughout the entire Air Force in the mid-'60s, talking about how there were mystery individuals, mysterious strangers, essentially sort of disguising themselves and passing themselves off as Air Force officers involved in UFO investigations. And this memorandum was actually circulated to real Air Force UFO investigators. So in other words, you had the Air Force's UFO research team saying, who are these guys going around pretending to be us? You know, it was like a realization hit home to the Air Force that, yes, they were investigating UFOs and visiting witnesses, but somebody else was doing it also and pretending to be this same group of people, the same team, which sort of really, you know, this sort of creates this bizarre, surreal imagery of the government people sitting around saying, I wonder who the men in black really are. You know, it gets into very strange areas like that.
It would be neat to know some people at the high levels to see what they found out.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think, ironically, I think they probably have a lot of data on the men in black, but I suspect to a degree they're as much in the dark as we are. I think they know that there's a phenomenon, but the phenomenon always seems to be one step ahead of us. You know, these stranger men in black, you know, they rarely turn up on a nice, bright, sunny day at noon. You know, it's always on a cold, windy, typical, you know, the dark and stormy nights at 10 o'clock and, you know, intimidate their way into the house and then they vanish into the shadows again afterwards. And that's one of the big problems, is not just, you know, addressing the cases, but he's trying to find these people because they just seem to appear and vanish in the blink of an eye. You know, 1 minute they're here, the next minute the person goes to the front door and looks out, and they're gone, and there's no sign of a car or anything like that.
Like without a trace.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, this is one of the problems as well, is not just, you know, they're elusive, they're almost too elusive.
So then that leads me to the question of, if they're not human, because in order to appear and vanish, you have to have some type of beyond supernatural ability. It's obviously beyond human ability. So what do you think they are?
Well, you know, that's the big question. I mean, the one thing I would stress first is that there's no doubt in my mind that there is one category of men in black that we know is real, and that is when government investigators have visited witnesses. You know, we do have a few files which do show that, you know, people who've spoken out about men in black experiences. Years later, certain government files have surfaced, and we've been able to identify that the person really was visited by, for example, the FBI or Air Force Intelligence or somebody like that.
Sure, I totally get that part. I totally agree with you.
So that's definitely a real down-to-earth, you know, aspect of the phenomenon. But then when it comes to these weirder ones, I'm sort of inclined to go down the path that we're dealing with entities or beings that are not of our world. Now, whether that makes them literally extraterrestrial, interdimensional, paranormal, or as one of the researchers, a man named Joshua Warren, who I interviewed for the book, speculated, time travelers from our future, you know, sort of time cops protecting timelines and coming back and, you know, meddling in our affairs to, you know, ensure that the past, present and future don't get sort of mangled, so to speak. I'm not entirely sure which scenario, or even a combination of them all, is the correct one. And I think it would be kind of arrogant and presumptuous of me without hard evidence to say it's got to be this or got to be that. But what I do believe is that there is a genuinely unknown, almost verging upon the paranormal aspect to the Men in Black mystery, and that there is a group or a category of Men in Black which are not human. Now, you know, some people would take the leap of faith that, well, that means they're definitively alien. You know, alien essentially means not from here. You know, it doesn't necessarily mean extraterrestrial. You know, things like quantum physics today are allowing for extra and multi-dimensions. And I kind of veer far more down that sort of pathway that, you know, the simple analogy is, you know, you get in your car and you tune your radio to this station and you don't like it, so you tune it to another. And I kind of liken it to that maybe that somebody has, or something has the ability to sort of tune into dimensions and other dimensions, and that's what makes them so elusive. You know, they really are here 1 minute and they really are gone the next. I think it's something along those lines.
Did you ever wonder if you wrote a book about them, if they would visit you?
Yeah, everybody asked me that. But so I'm kind of lucky that where my office is, it points out right to the street. So if a dark black car turns up, I can get prepared with the camera and everything
You're
else.
so funny, but you also said that they can just show up in your apartment or your place without even knocking at the door.
Oh, yeah, I mean, those reports are sort of